when I got into this business in 2010, when I started working in pharmacy, the pharmacy spend as a percentage of the overall spend was probably 25, 30% of the overall spend. Today, it's 50 to 55%. It actually can be more than the medical, depending on the client. So it is extremely important that you make the right PBM choice, because ultimately that's going to affect the care that your employees get. And I think employers ultimately, at the end of the day, want to provide solid coverage for their employees in an environment that is driving results from a health perspective.
Hi, and welcome to Captivating Health Insights. Today we are talking all about pharmacy benefits and navigating the pharmacy space. I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Kevin Kobielski, President and Founder of Navion. Welcome, Kevin.
Great to be here. I'm excited about the conversation.
I am too, and I would love to start with how you got into this crazy world of pharmacy.
Sure. I probably have the only pharmacy origin story that has to do with Dave Matthews. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
I went to school for accounting. I went to the University of Buffalo, that's where I'm from, and graduated from that program, and subsequently went to work for a large firm. And just based on travel and some other things, family stuff, I ended up moving to a health plan. And I was the director of audit for a period of time. And I, at one point, took a role as kind of a strategic advisor to our senior leadership. And there was an individual that was in charge of pharmacy. He didn't want to do it anymore. And he basically said, "Hey, you want to switch jobs?" And I was like, "Well, that sounds pretty interesting. I don't really know much about pharmacy, so I'll go and do that." This was back, I think, in 2010.
Wow.
So I went over to pharmacy and started running the pharmacy department. And a lot of what I know today is based on that experience of being on the other side and underwriting and knowing the things that are going on there. So when you come to this side, it's a good perspective to have. So when I was there, we had a vendor that we did medical injectable stuff with. There's medical injectables on the medical benefit. And the guy that ran that division for the company became a friend of mine, where he and I and his wife and my wife would go to Saratoga every year to see Dave Matthews. And one year when I left Health Now, he was, we were in the pool waiting to go see the show. And he's like, "We should start up a consulting company." And I'm like, "Wow, that sounds a great idea." Because I had seen from my side of the fence that, there were a lot of folks out there that didn't understand and, in my view, weren't making the best decisions related to pharmacy. So him and I, on that July day in the pool, decided to start this up. And then I came over. At the time, it was called a different name of the company, but that was in 2016. And we've been, going along for the last 10 years, helping people navigate this space, because it's complicated,
It's really complicated. And explain to people who may not be familiar with Navion what a pharmacy consultant is.
Sure. So we help a number of different constituents, let's say employer groups, TPAs, brokers, health plans, navigate the pharmacy space. So for an employer group or a broker, a lot of our focus is on making sure they make the right PBM choice and ultimately drive the highest quality care for the lowest possible price. And then on the other side of that, we also work with entities where we try to help them be better at offering those services to our clients, right? So we advise them on, here's a program that you should look into. And because it's a complicated space, there's programs popping up all the time, and people are really looking for guidance on programs and trying to do the best thing for their employees or their members, if they're the PBM or the health plan.
I love it. So you took what you learned on the carrier side, learning all about pharmacy in the background of this big carrier, and then you went to a Dave Matthews concert, and the idea was born.
Yeah, interestingly enough, at one point, my partner and I, we met Dave, and we told him that he was our official corporate band. So yeah, it's
That's
been a
awesome.
joke. We have pictures of the band up in the office, but yeah, it's funny how the world works, right? You
Yeah.
get an accounting degree and you end up at pharmacy. It's funny.
Yeah, well, it's very complex, and so we're going to get into that today, hopefully making it a little bit more simplistic for people, talking about PBMs in this world of pharmacy. So why is selecting the right PBM or a strong PBM such a critical decision for plan sponsors and employers?
Yeah, so when I got into this business in 2010, when I started working in pharmacy, the pharmacy spend as a percentage of the overall spend was probably 25-30% of the overall spend. Today, it's 50 to 55%. It actually can be more than the medical, depending on the client. So it is extremely important that you make the right PBM choice, not only from a pricing, clinical management, all those things, because ultimately that's going to affect the care that your employees get. And I think employers ultimately, at the end of the day, want to provide solid coverage for their employees in an environment that is driving results from a health perspective. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride so far.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people have about PBMs today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of them. I think number one is the idea that there are good and bad PBMs or good and bad PBM models, transparent versus traditional. I think when we kind of go in and we're looking at PBM options, we're completely agnostic. What we want to do is we want to evaluate objectively every element of what they do and help our clients make that decision, because you could have a PBM that's great for a municipality that would not be very good for a large corporate client, right? So those are
Gotcha.
two different PBMs. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're making that right choice, because it's expensive. So pharmacy PMPM trends, we've seen them over $200 PMPM. It's a significant investment. And I think oftentimes, since costs are always going up, employers sometimes doubt the benefit they're getting. So we spend a lot of our time with our clients doing a lot of analytics to prove ROI on programs and make sure that they're comfortable with, the programs they selected or the PBM they selected.
So in your example, what would make a PBM better for a municipality, or like what are those variables?
I think formulary composition. So generally with a municipality, you have individuals that are on open formulary, so they're used to getting all the drugs that are available to them, where for a large corporate client, they're more of a closed formulary, more management. Municipality, and this is changing a little bit, but generally they're not as excited about kind of ancillary programs, and the reason for that is it causes disruption, and they have union contracts, and it makes it very hard to make changes, or even their carrier may be written into that union contract. So I think there's certain restrictions. They tend to be more sensitive to that disruption, where larger clients or even corporate clients in general, they're more willing to take on different programs. And I would also say that the smaller the client, the more they're willing to take on different things to reduce costs, because when you get a couple members on a specialty drug for that client that's 100 lives, it's far more important than if you have 10,000 lives and you have those same two people, right?
Yeah.
Because the cost of it. So when we go through our modeling for different clients, we kind of recommend, here are kind of the PBMs that we think are a good fit. But we have situations where people are like, well, I'm never going to that PBM, or I'm never doing this, or I'm never going here. And we try to steer them from that and say, well, let us look objectively at what's going on, because I think at some level, PBMs are always playing some type of financial gymnastics to make their deal look good. It's just part of the business, and it's the reason why we have clients, right? Because we're trying to cut through all that. So
Yeah, I've heard you guys have been called a pharmacy benefit manager, PBM watchdog, basically kind of keeping everybody honest and an unbiased third party outside opinion, evaluating all the different factors.
yeah, so when I was on the other side,
Meaning the carrier side?
the carrier side, it became very clear to me, and I would say this is for most of the PBMs we worked with, is they will underwrite the deal based on the sophistication of the client. So if they know that someone's not watching certain things, they will put certain contract languages or do certain things. And again, these are entities that are for-profit companies. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way the world works. So you need to make sure that you're looking at those little things to make sure you're getting the best deal possible. And the worst thing you want is to sign a PBM, get in there, and then a year later you find out that you didn't get the savings, you didn't hit your contract guarantees. So we try to make sure that all of that is defined up front, it's fully auditable, and hold the PBMs accountable, because it's certainly important given the dollars at stake, you know.
Yeah, there's just more of the basics. There's a lot of noise right now about transparent versus traditional. What is the difference between a transparent and a traditional PBM?
Yeah, that is the big debate. That's like Coke and Pepsi, right? Like, which one's better? I don't think one model's better than the other. I think that just like each employer is different, some employers are okay with a traditional model, others are more transparent. And basically what transparent is supposed to mean is that the fees the PBMs are charging are transparent. So, you know, it's generally an admin fee, it's generally spelled out in the contract, and there's no other sources of revenue other than that admin fee.
That's how a transparent PBM is making their money from, mainly is from that admin fee.
From the admin fee. Now, they also may have fees for programs like a manufacturer's assistant program, but that's kind of all spelled out. So there's a transparency of fees. And I think what also people read into transparency, which I don't think is the case all the time, is they feel that transparency is the PBMs making the best decision with their interest in mind, right? And I don't think that that's the case. I think there are just as many transparent PBMs that aren't making the right decisions with that. So, but I think everyone hears transparency and like, that's great, right?
Right.
But I will say that if you have a discount, looking purely financially, if you have, we work with AWP discounts, and if you have a AWP discount.
And what's AWP?
Average wholesale price.
Okay.
It's the way drugs are priced. So
Okay.
if you have that at retail at say 85%, and in a traditional model, and then you have one at 82 with a transparent model, I'll take that 85 all day long, because it's a better
Right, it's
discount.
the lowest net cost.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think what ends up happening a lot of times though with traditional PBMs, and it's part of why we exist, is that people don't like the idea that the PBM is making money from avenues that aren't disclosed to the client. So for example, they may be holding up, if they own their own specialty pharmacy, they own that, so they're making margin on that. They may be taking a portion of rebates. They take spread on drugs so the client pays one number, and then the PBM bills another number, or gets billed from the pharmacy another number, so that's called spread. And a lot of people don't like that notion, and you can see what's going on kind of legislatively in the United States, that there's been a lot of things at not only a state level, but a federal level of trying to get that transparency rules and structure for all PBMs, because people feel that having disclosure of revenue is important. But I've just seen that somebody will say they're transparent, but there's always something going on. Like it's hard to navigate. It's hard to legislate that, because there's always ways around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
you mentioned specialty pharmacy. So can you explain that for people that aren't as familiar with what specialty means, and that some
Sure.
PBMs own one and some don't?
So there are a lot of conditions that require very high cost meds, right? So cancer being one of them, multiple sclerosis being another one. And these meds are generally, let's say, anything over $3,000 per fill, and it can vary. And these drugs generally require a special pharmacy because they require kind of cold chain. So the drugs need to be cold from the minute they leave the pharmacy to the minute they get to the house. The specialty pharmacies also are experts, and they have kind of centers of excellence in those areas. So for example, you can look at a specialty pharmacy like a Credo, and they will have experts in oncology. And when you have questions and you're talking to them, they are oncology based. So it's supposed to be a better service model.
So a Credo is like a vendor solution that can be used in the pharmacy space?
It's a specialty pharmacy for ESI. So it's their own
for
specialty
ESI,
pharmacy.
okay. And
so,
ESI is one of the big three
Big three
Express
PBMs.
Scripts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So generally the large generally, the large traditional PBMs own their own specialty pharmacy, and the smaller PBMs, either transparent or traditional, generally outsource it to another. And one of the things that people like about that is, if you think about it, if the PBM owns the specialty pharmacy, their motivation is to get the client to spend as much as possible on the specialty drugs because they're selling the drugs.
It's all in-house.
Yes.
Right.
So one of the things we like to kind of look at is potentially either outsourcing the prior authorization process, which is the approval for that drug, or even the fulfillment of that drug to another PBM, because they don't have the incentive to just fill the drug, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
a great example of that is a lot of the larger PBMs will say, well, you have to fill a specialty med for 90 days. Now, we recommend for all our clients 30 days, because if that member starts that medication, for example, and they can't deal with the side effects, now you have another 60 days of med that you just paid for.
Oh, wow. There's cost savings and even just eliminating that 60 days from the 90, yeah.
Or if, say, an employee is leaving, right? So they get their 90-day fill and they leave the company. Now you just paid for 2 months when they're not even working for you anymore. Right. So that has come up too with GLP-1s, is the same concept, that we generally like to keep things at 30 days, because the reason why PBMs like 90 is because they're filling the meds. And you know, the crazy thing with pharmacy is they have these weird statistics that really don't mean anything. So a PBM will say to you, it's like, well, we're gonna do 90-day fills because we wanna increase adherence, right? So I think we talked about this before. When I got into pharmacy, I was just very surprised that PBMs had programs to get people to take their meds. You'd think people would just do it, but they don't, right? So it's a weird thing. But with PBMs, what they'll say is like, well, we're gonna give them a 90-day fill, and the way they calculate adherence is how many days filled over the total year, right? So if you only have to fill that drug 4 times a year, the actual adherence rate will be higher, even though you don't even know if the member's taking the drug. So it's just one of those metrics that really don't matter.
Right, because you don't really know if people are taking their drugs or not.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea behind mail order, right? PBMs want you to go to mail order. They own the mail order facility, and they say that it's going to increase adherence. And I don't really think there's any really justifiable studies that I have seen that prove that out, other than the fact that, yes, using the current way that we measure adherence, yes, that metric goes up, but it doesn't necessarily the members taking the drug, you know? So that's the challenge.
I really appreciate your perspective on transparent versus traditional PBM, because a lot of the noise in the industry is preaching transparent only, which is great to have transparency. Of course, we want transparency in healthcare more everywhere. Yep. But are there instances where you as a consultant might look at a traditional model because it's maybe a better fit for an employer? What does that look like?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think oftentimes, in general, transparent PBMs have their economics aren't as strong. So their rebates, their discounts are lower. They don't look as great on a spreadsheet. And their whole thing is that they're managing things better clinically, but there's some doubt about that. But I think that you could go with a traditional model. And what I like to recommend with traditional models is a traditional model, so you get the advantage of the strong pricing, but have all the stuff in the contract that protects you, and make sure that it's audited and that you have market checks and all those things. And then also another bonus is a traditional PBM that will allow you to bolt on programs. That's the key, right? So being able to bolt on those programs, you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. You're getting the strong unit cost savings. You're getting somebody that's kind of auditing to make sure you're getting it. And then you could also add the programs on. Because if you go back a couple years ago, and you could still see this a little bit with the big three, is they won't allow you to do an international specialty or a manufacturer's assistance program because it eats into their margin, right? So ultimately, you want the strong economics, you want at least transparency from a contract perspective, and the ability to manage trend however you want. You know, that's, to me, the ideal. But again, we have clients with transparent and traditional PBM. So we have a mix. So again, it's clients, because some clients are very adamant, I'm not doing anything other than transparent PBM. And that's fine too. We're there just to advise them, and based on our experience, give them some options. So ultimately they can make the best choice for them, and only they know what's the best choice for them. We can give them as much information, but ultimately it's their call.
And a big part of that is the utilization of your population, right? It depends on what drugs are people taking and how does that fit into the bigger picture, right? So you need to know those things. I mean, sometimes you can't get that data because you're fully insured. And so I understand we're talking more about self-funded employers, but talk about how the utilization matters, right?
Yeah, I mean, so when we go through and analyze the utilization, since you have price points at every different bucket, like specialty is different than retail, and then you have brand versus generic, the actual utilization of the client matters, right? So if you have a client that doesn't have a ton of specialty, and a PBM that allows a MAP program probably wouldn't be as important to them as
And
one that
what is a MAP program?
Manufacturer's assistance. So it allows the individual client to get the drug funded through the manufacturer. The member has a $0 cost share. The employer is billed either on a PMPM basis or a percentage of savings. So those programs are under scrutiny lately, but there are programs definitely that drive savings only if you have specialty, right? So we had a client the other day where their utilization with the MAP program was so low, it didn't justify the rebate loss. So we took them out of that program and put them in a regular specialty copay program, which does not have an impact on rebates. So it is really client specific. You want to develop a tailored solution and have PBMs that will allow you to be flexible to put a solution in front of the client that's, works the best for them.
And for people that aren't as familiar with rebates, that's a big part of the differentiation between transparent and traditional PBMs as well, right? Can you talk about the kind of the difference with rebates there?
Yeah, so the rebate is the manufacturer will pay a rebate. So it's almost similar to cars, right? Where you have MSRP for the car, and then the dealer's like, well, we'll give you $2,000 off, right? But in that instance, the person buying the car gets it. But in the pharmacy world, generally that goes to the employer, right? So employer will have utilization, and based on their brand drug utilization, they will have guarantees in their contract, and then the PBM will pay the employer based on that, right? So rebates are a big deal, and ultimately, this is a great thing, because if you have, Humira is the big one now, right? So if you have Humira and you are paying, just making this number up, $6,000 for that drug, and then you have a biosimilar that's $3,000.
And a biosimilar is?
It's kind of like a generic version in the specialty space. There's different idiosyncrasies there, but it's basically the generic version of a specialty med. And let's say that drug costs $3,000, right? So someone looking at that, well, all day long, I want to go with that biosimilar. But what if on that Humira claim, there was a $4,000 rebate? So the net, that drug is $2,000, right? Now, the question becomes, are you getting that full rebate? And there's a lot of questions around that. But ultimately, it's complicated, because depending on the financial structure, that preferring the biosimilar isn't necessarily lowest net cost. And the other thing you can make the argument is, if you're a small PBM and you're transparent and your rebates aren't good, you can make the argument for them that the biosimilar is the right choice. But a PBM that has strong economics and has a 60% rebate on Humira, it makes sense for them to have Humira on the formulary, right? So it gets very complicated based on the individual. So we go through all that and ultimately come up with what that looks like financially, so that our clients can, make the decision on that.
So what are the most important components when employers are evaluating PBMs? Like you said, there's a lot of different things to think about, things that you all evaluate. What should they be thinking about?
I mean, I think the first thing is the financial economics of the deal. So that looks like rebates, what we just talked about, discounts. So when you go to the pharmacy, what ultimately you pay, any type of admin fee, dispensing fee, those economics, as well as the financial terms associated with those, like which ones are excluded, how there's a lot of gamesmanship around the financials. So the financials certainly, I feel, are important. And I think a close second is the clinical management. Uh, I feel that over the next 10 years, that's going to become more important than the pricing, I think.
The
Because I think,
clinical strategies.
yeah, because I think what's happening with pricing is it keeps getting deeper and deeper, right? So generic discounts used to be in the 70s, now they're high 80s, 90s. At some point, you can't discount it 100%, right? So it gets to the point where you're going to get less of a differential pricing wise, and ultimately getting to the clinical side, and that piece is important. And that includes also formulary disruption, because when you move to a PBM, you want to make sure that members aren't disrupted and that's done in the right way. And then you can start looking at things like member experience, group experience, those kind of things. Those tend to be kind of secondary in nature to those first two, because the first two really drive the spend, and that's what everyone's really concerned about. So
The first two meaning the
clinical and financial
Mhm.
are the big things that most of my employers, that's when we get phone calls like my spend's really crazy, or this clinical program. They're asking about clinical programs. Like everyone talks about GLP-1s now. That's the big thing. So
Right.
everyone's trying to, like, the question is how it gets complicated, because you're like, well, are those good for your employees or are they bad? Yes, they help people lose weight, but they're expensive. They potentially losing weight helps with other things like diabetes and all these other things. So there is varying views.
It's a complicated answer. You can't just
Yes.
say it's not black and white,
Yes.
yes or no. It's also a philosophy of the employer and what they believe, what they
Yeah,
want to provide for their
absolutely.
employees.
We had a hospital that we dealt with, and they, for whatever reason, they were not interested at all in not covering these. They wanted them fully covered. They felt that they were driving value for their population. And then I have other employers like, absolutely not, we're not covering those for
For
weight
weight
loss.
loss, right?
Yeah, so
They'd be covering
diabetes,
for
of course.
diabetes,
Yeah.
other conditions. Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those, that class of medication is one that we talk about pretty much every day with our clients. It's
Sure.
just up there with specialty is GLP-1, and there's more and more programs coming out to manage that. So yeah, that's an interesting area to discuss for sure.
What would you say is the most effective clinical management strategies that you've seen?
So I think there's a number of things you could do clinically. I think the foundation is formulary, right? So you want to have a formulary that drives utilization to the best possible drug at the lowest possible price. There are a lot of medications out there that are very expensive that do the same thing as a drug that's one half the price or one quarter of the price. Like, is to me the biggest deal. And then when I say formula, I'm also talking about step therapy. So you got to step through this drug before you get to this drug. Quantity edits.
What's a quantity edit?
So it says you can't get more than this drug per fill.
Okay.
Right. Oftentimes, GLP-1s are a great example. There's issues with when you start the dose, you got to titrate it up, and people can't deal with the side effects. You don't want to have a huge quantity dispensed at once. Sometimes it's on specialty too, where they will only fill a 15-day supply to make sure, like for a lot of cancer meds, so that the side effect profile is so bad, because these drugs are expensive. So I think formulary management. I think the other big thing is prior authorization. So prior authorization is when the doctor has to fill out a form with all the different elements of your medical diagnosis and the drug, and then the health plan or the PBM looks at that and says, okay, based on all this criteria and the medical knowledge, does this drug meet the need of this patient's condition? And having strong PA criteria that's very clinically based, that's updated all the time, is also very important. And then having programs that help with switching utilization. So physician detailing programs are great, where you have individuals from the plan, the PBM, or the carrier reaching out to doctors to get individuals on lower cost products. Same clinical efficacy, but moving people to those. There's technology now that does that. A lot of PBMs have apps where it'll pop up on the individual's phone and say, hey, you have the ability to save this kind of money going to this drug, and clinically they're very similar right now. You have a lot of folks that are being driven to biosimilars, right? So that's a big deal. So it's all of those kind of clinical elements. And, there also is an element of, making sure people are taking their meds, they're managing their side effects and those kind of things. So I believe PBMs going forward are going to, and I see it, are trying to differentiate more from a clinical perspective than a pricing perspective. That is the new, you'll have a PBM that'll say, well, we're gonna review every drug that costs over $2,000, where one PBM will say, well, we're just gonna PA half those, we're not gonna PA all of them. And then you have, as an employer and a consultant, have to decide, well, is PAing everything over $1,000, does that make any sense? Is that driving any more value? And that's a complicated question, right? So, because the more drugs you have PA on, the more difficult it is for that member to get that drug. So there's no perfect solution. Like, every option has some type of downside. And just like medicine, right? You got to take a drug, you got to worry about side effects, but ultimately, if you feel the upside is better, you make that choice. And it's similar with the PBM world.
We've already talked about MAP, manufacturers assistance programs. Let's talk about that, and then also international sourcing, what that is, what it means,
Sure.
and how they help reduce overall drug spend.
So we talked about rebates. There's a lot of programs like MAP programs that are essentially another rebate. So what ends up happening is a lot of manufacturers will have programs that if you meet certain criteria, they will give you that drug for free. Okay. So that's been around forever.
Criteria meaning?
Income, household income's the big one, right?
Okay.
So if you make under the poverty level, or they have some derivative of the poverty level, you will get this drug for free. So the manufacturer would send the drug directly to that member if they can prove that, their household income is below a threshold. Companies said, well, we're going to go out there and we're going to get your members to enroll in those programs. So we're going to go and we're going to require that they enroll in those. So the adoption rate of those programs went up. And then generally what happens, so if you have a drug that costs $100,000 a year, so the employer is paying $100,000 a year, and a MAP vendor comes in and gets that drug approved through the manufacturer, that cost goes from $100,000 to zero.
Zero, like that.
Yeah, like that. And then the other side of that is now that vendor is billing that client either $25,000 or $30,000, depending on what their percentage of savings is, right? And then it gets complicated. Is that percentage of savings based on the drug cost of the drug? Is it including rebate? So
that's how the MAP and PAP vendors may get paid. They may get paid a percentage of savings. How much money did they save the employer on the cost of the drug, or a PEPM?
Yeah, which model's better, right? Well, if you have no adoption of the drugs, a PMPM model is not great because you're paying for nothing.
Right.
But if you have heavy adoption, yes, you're paying a bigger fee, but you're only paying if you're saving money. So, MAP programs are big. And the reason why they're interconnected with international specialty is there's been a lot of manufacturer scrutiny over the last few years, a couple lawsuits filed about these vendors, at least in pharma's eyes, kind of abusing these programs. We don't feel that that's the case. We feel that they follow the letter of the law with the program. So they've been making it more difficult to get those drugs approved. So what we've seen is kind of a little bit of a drop off in the adoption rate of those programs, or at least the approval rate within the members in the program. And now those vendors that are out there are also adding an international specialty component. And basically what that is, it's sourcing your specialty medication from like a tier 1 country, Canada, New Zealand.
Tier 1 means they're safe and approved, or
yeah, so you're not getting your meds from like Syria, right? Like it's a legit country that has an infrastructure and it's
regulated.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of clients use those programs. They really like it. The doctor sends the script to the international pharmacy, they fill it, and it gets sent to that member.
Same drug, just being sourced internationally.
That's right. So it gets complicated, right? Because with an international drug, and usually specialty, you don't earn a rebate on that. So when you're doing your cost analysis, you have to look at what is that drug cost at the PBM minus the rebate, and then compare it to what the international is. You got to factor in the rebate. So it gets complicated. So what we've done with some of our employers is you have almost like a formulary of approved drugs that are allowed to go to international based on their economics. So we've seen a significant adoption of those international programs because the savings is significant. Like if you're looking at Stelara, for example, which is a big drug out there, if you're getting that through a PBM, it's going to be anywhere between $20,000 and $24,000, and you can get that drug internationally between $9,000 and $12,000. So it's significant. So employers are, especially small employers, they can't afford all these. So it's either like sometimes they go out of business or they got to find other ways to get these drugs. And those really have increased in popularity. There's been a bunch of vendors pop up recently doing international specialty. You could do international on the non-specialty side as well. So like Ozempic, right? So everyone's trying to get Ozempic. You can go internationally to get that as well. So there's been a real increase in the adoption of those programs. And my only advice there is make sure you're evaluating it appropriately and you're not, just taking the vendor's view of the savings, because ultimately they are making probably assumptions that are in their benefit and not necessarily the benefit of the client. So you got to have a second set of eyes.
Assumptions meaning they're assuming how many people may qualify for a drug, like with the MAP program, because they may say, oh, we can save you this much money, but they're assuming that 80% of the employees are actually going to use it or actually want to source their drug internationally or whatever it is.
The other thing that they're doing, right, so these MAP vendors went to international specialty, they're also doing biosimilar conversion. So they're moving people off, they'll partner with a pharmacy, they will move that individual off the reference product or the brand product to a biosimilar, and then they'll generally charge a percentage of savings, right? So this is like anything else, and that's why this legislation stuff is tough to navigate, because anytime you try to legislate something, people just find ways around it, right? They find new ways to. So, and I ultimately think it's very tough to regulate this industry. I do feel it needs some regulation, but employers, especially self-funded employers, should have a choice of options that they want to potentially go with, and it's up to them whether they feel international is right for them or not. Because I have some clients that would never do international. I have many of my clients that are doing it today and love it, and they're saving a lot of money.
Yeah, for people that don't really know about international sourcing yet, what is kind of the controversy there of the legality of it?
So it depends who you talk to. So when I was on the carrier side, so when I was at a health plan, I'm like, yeah, international, that's not good. You don't want to do that. Those drugs, you don't know where they're coming from, the legality of them. So we would speak to that side of it.
Really?
And the PBMs are on the other side, right? And I am kind of agnostic. What I'll say is that we have done a lot of international specialty, have not had any issues at all, and it allows individuals to get the drugs at a much cheaper price. So I think there's been over the years an acceptance of international as an option, because ultimately what ends up happening, we know this with healthcare, is that the United States is paying a lot more for these drugs than other countries are. We had, and it varies too. So that Stelara example, we had one pharmacy that was offering it for $11,000, and we had another that was offering it for $5,000, two different countries. So if you really want to get fancy, you start sourcing them from different countries. Again, tier 1 countries, and then they also have technology where it's kind of neat, where they put it into a package and they have a chip in there that tells you if the package got below a certain temperature. And because those meds have to stay cold, right? So they are using technology to get into the hands of members low-cost medications that ultimately is good for the member, because they can't afford. There's a reason why they're going that, because generally what happens with specialty programs, the international ones, the member goes from paying whatever their cost share is, and let's say it's a $100 copay, to zero. So they don't pay anything. So they get the drug for free, and then the employer also saves a bunch of money. The other thing that is new these days that we're doing a lot of and exploring is Mark Cuban's Cost Plus program. So that's a little different. That is mostly for generics. And the idea there is there has been, especially with specialty generics and other generics, where there is huge markup at the PBM for certain generics. And if you source those at another pharmacy, so we had a client, 4,000 lives the other day, where we did the analysis and we factored in rebates and did the whole analysis, very objective, and they had a $700,000 opportunity if all those individuals went to Mark Cuban to do that. Now, the issue right now is that the member then has to go and do that. They have to call the doctor, get the script
on their own.
Yeah, members aren't going to do that, right? So we're looking at some potential solutions to help that and facilitate that process. But just by moving drugs from different pharmacies, different fulfillment channels, you can save a lot of money. And it's the same drug, so there's no you don't have to convince them the biosimilar is the same. I mean, it's funny. I've been in this business for 15 years, and my mother still thinks that somehow generics are inferior, right? Because it's just, that's what, it's kind of like, oh, I went to the store and I wanted to get Tide versus the white labeled supermarket version. And some people have this perception that's not as
Right,
good.
it's marketing. Yeah,
It's
it's the
marketing,
same
right? Yeah.
ingredients.
Part 1 with Kevin Kobielski ends here, but the conversation continues. Listen to Part 2 now.